Hey guys, and welcome back to Vlogmas. I'm Tara Swiger, and here on this channel, we talk about how to succeed in your creative business, how to keep good mental health, and I also share what I'm reading and loving, and that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to talk about a book that I think every foster parent needs to read, and heck, every parent needs to read this book, but you don't even have to have kids. If you're a human being, you need to read this book. So it is The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and it is about healing the long-term effects of childhood adversity. Now, if you're reading this and you're thinking, well, I didn't have childhood adversity, I didn't grow up in that kind of community, we're not that kind of people, you're wrong, because childhood adversity actually applies to many of us. Most of us, actually, more than half of us, the majority of us. So the book is about the research and the story that Dr. Burke-Harris went through in discovering ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which is actually a study that was done by someone else. She discovered that study, realized how it impacted the clinic that she ran in Bayview, which is a poorer area neighborhood of San Francisco. And she was realizing how it was impacting her patients' physical health. So she went on a journey to figure out how is something that an experience you have, how does it impact your physical well-being? And she guides you through what she discovered, what she learned, then the research that her and her team started doing. They now have a clinic for, I think it's called the Clinic for Youth Wellness, Center for Youth Wellness, where they not only pay attention to adverse childhood experiences, but also research what interventions are working at reducing the long-term health impact of childhood adversity. Because that's the heart of this book, is that experiences that happen in childhood have long-term consequences on your physical well-being. So a lot of us think, and she talks about this, right, you had an adverse childhood, maybe there was poverty or domestic violence or substance abuse, and therefore you make those kind of decisions in adulthood, and that's why you have adverse health outcomes. No. In fact, even if you do none of the risky behaviors associated with some diseases, those diseases still happen more often in people who had adverse childhood experiences than they do people that didn't. Even if you have none of the behaviors, so it's not that experiences lead to risky behaviors, which leads to outcomes. It's literally, even if you do none of the behaviors, the studies show about 50% of it is still just based on the experiences of toxic stress. So here's the thing about adverse childhood experiences. There is a study by Dr. Felitti that actually first looked at these, and I'm going to read you what they are. His study was in the initial study, 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated, and yet 67% of the participants had at least one ACE, which is adverse childhood experience. I'm going to go over what the ACEs actually are in a minute. 12.6% had 4 or more categories of ACEs. So here are the 10 categories of ACEs. You get your score, your ACE score, by marking off which of these you've had experience with. So maybe it's 1, maybe it's 4, maybe like me it's 7. So here we go. Recurrent emotional abuse, recurrent physical abuse, any sexual abuse contact, any physical neglect, emotional neglect, that's 5. 6 is substance abuse in the household. For example, living with an alcoholic or a person with substance abuse problems. 7 is mental illness in the household. For example, living with someone who suffered from depression or any mental illness or who had attempted suicide. 8 is mother treated violently. So in this study, they specifically said mother, but in fact, now studies count any domestic abuse that you witnessed. And these are, I should have said, these ACEs are if you experienced it before your 18th birthday. So domestic abuse in the house. 9 is divorce or parental separation, which many of us, our parents divorced or separated. 10 is criminal behavior in the household. For example, a household member going to prison or being in trouble with the law or getting arrested, that kind of thing. So those are the 10 categories of ACEs. Keep in mind that in the initial study of 17,000 people in a well-off neighborhood in San Diego, over 12.6% of them had 4 or more ACEs. 67% of them had at least 1. So the thing is the initial study found that a dose-response relationship between ACEs and poor health outcomes. In other words, the higher your ACE score, the higher chances of poor health outcome. Why does this matter? Well, this matters because there are interventions we can do, both for the children in our life who've experienced ACEs and for ourselves. And we can help mitigate the adverse health outcomes through choices that we make and behaviors that we engage in now in adulthood, even if we experience it in our childhood. But what's really great is neuroplasticity. Our brains are able to change all throughout our life. And children's brains are especially neuroplastic, meaning that even if they've experienced 10 out of 10 ACEs, if you can start doing these interventions while they're still children, if you can catch it, at your pediatrician's office, or if you have a child come into your home, or if you just are in a relationship with a child who's experienced ACEs, you can start doing these interventions in childhood, and you're going to have a dramatic impact on reducing the health outcomes. So she spends the first half of the book really looking at, but wait, how do experiences in our childhood lead to actual physical disease in our body? And like I said, it's not because of risky behavior. It's like something changes. And what she found in the research is that these ACEs lead to what she calls toxic stress. So toxic stress is a physiological response to the stressful experience. But unlike quick stress, like a Baird's attack, in the moment you have the stress response, which is a whole bunch of stuff that happens in your brain, the chemicals and your hormones and your adrenaline pumps, and then you run and then you're safe and you breathe deep and it kind of leaves you. Toxic stress is like you're living with the bear. Like someone comes home every night and is abusive to you or a family member, or you live with an alcoholic. That is living with a bear. And so you're having that stress response all of the time or regularly, or for example, in the instance of sexual abuse, the trauma, your body is reliving the trauma and the feeling of unsafety when a similar situation happens. Even if there's no abuse again, it can still spark that toxic stress. So that toxic stress physiologically changes our body. They did a study on kids who had 4 or more ACEs and were removed from their home. Their hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that helps you manage your reaction, your behavior, your like flying off the handle when you're mad at something, it was actually shrunken in kids who had experienced 4 or more ACEs. And even 6 months after having been removed from the situation, it continued to shrink. So it's physiologically different. It impacts our lungs. It actually impacts how our cells divide, which leads to cancer if bad cells divide too quickly before they're killed off by your healthy cells. She goes way into the science about how it happens. She has a whole section about the physiological changes that happen through toxic stress in all of the different parts of your brain, the parts of your brain that manage reward center, your hormones, which are both stress, relax hormones, and your like reproductive hormones like testosterone and estrogen. All of those are implicated in a toxic stress response. And so all of it can continue on and lead to health outcomes. The good news, like I said, is neuroplasticity. So if you can do the interventions while the child is still a child, they're extra neuroplastic. But even if you're an adult, when I did this as a live on Instagram, someone asked, wait, what if we're an adult? If you're an adult and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have an ACE score, what do I do? Let me first tell you the interventions for everybody are the same. Well, I'll read you this thing. So Janet asks, a person she's at dinner with, so it's obvious why screening every child is a must, but what do you do if you're an adult and you had ACEs as a kid? Is there a treatment for that? Absolutely, I said. It's Dr. Burke. It's never too late to start rewiring your stress response. The impact of interventions for toxic stress might not be quite as dramatic in adults as it is in our kids, but it could still make a big difference. This might sound simple, but I cannot overstate this. The single most important thing is recognizing what the problem is in the first place. I shared with them my observation that many people with overactive stress responses, don't know what's happening in their bodies, so they spend all this time chasing down the symptoms instead of getting to the source of the problem. Once folks understand what's going on, they've taken the first steps towards healing. I went on to explain that for toxic stress, the 6 things I recommend for my patients are just as important for adults. And these are the 6 things. Sleep, healthy sleep, enough sleep. Exercise, which she talks about being 30 to 60 minutes of like physical movement a day. So for a kid, it could just be like playing on the playground, swinging, riding their bike, roller skating. For an adult, it might be whatever, jumping on a trampoline, going to the gym, lifting weights, running. Basically something to get your like adrenaline and cortisol reset. So sleep, exercise, nutrition, in other words, lots of vitamins like vitamin D and vitamin B12 are really crucial to helping your neurological system actually work right. Your neurons actually fire and actually improve neuroplasticity. So nutrition, mindfulness, which is just like a mindfulness practice. You can actually read more about mindfulness-based stress response or stress relief. It's MBSR. There's a lot of studies about how mindfulness can reduce toxic stress. Mental health, that's the 5th one. So mental health being, if you have a mental health issue, you get it dealt with, and you also make sure you keep yourself in good mental health, which I talked about in a recent Vlogmas video. And the 6th one is healthy relationships. So one of the most amazing things about our studies is that we are buffers for each other. Our healthy relationships and healthy bonding and attachment can actually help reduce the impact that an ACE has on another person. It's especially important in childhood, having a caregiver with a healthy, strong attachment who is attuned to their needs. So the first intervention she does for kids that come into her pediatrician clinic with problems related to ACEs is prescribe child-parent psychotherapy. And in that therapy, the parent or caregiver actually learns how to respond in a way that builds attachment to the child. But there's a lot of research on building attachments. It basically requires being attuned to the person's needs, looking in their eyes, letting them express themselves, and providing a judgment-free zone full of love and acceptance. So it's awesome. We can do that with our kids. Great. But we can also do that for each other. You can do that for your partners. You can do that for your friends. You can help through love, acceptance, and like actual literal hugs. Hugging helps reduce the stress response. You can provide that for the people in your life. So I think it's so amazing because all of us experience adversity in life, as some of us experienced as children, some of us experienced as adults, but we can buffer the outcome of that for each other by being loving and kind and accepting and literally hugging each other. I think that's a beautiful thing. That's an amazing thing that humans living in community can do that for each other. So it's healthy relationships. So those 6 interventions, again, you can read more about them in the book: sleep, nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, mental health, and healthy relationships. So I would just really recommend you read this book. I loved it. It's like in the form of a story, although there's tons of research behind it. And I would love to hear if you have research or books or resources that you love around ACEs. I think this is an important thing for us to be aware of, as especially adults, maybe dealing with our own mental health issues, or people in relationships with others, like recognizing ACEs and then talking about ACEs with your loved ones, with your friends. I found to be really eye-opening and helps me understand more what's going on. So if you have resources about ACEs, you have resources about any of those 6 interventions like mental health, healthy relationships, share them in the comments below. I'd love to create a bunch of resources about this. I'm going to put links to this book, to the ACE questionnaire where you can figure out your own ACE score, and anything else you guys would like resources for, just tell me below and I'll share it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for loving each other and taking care of each other and taking care of yourself. This is where self-care isn't baths and painting your nails. This self-care is actually taking care and giving yourself what you need in order to stay well. So I love you bunches. I would hug you if I could. Have an excellent day.